Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Jamuna Tira Banachari Jamuna Tira Banachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Jeevanadhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Jeevanadhari Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Banachari Yamuna Tira Banachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Svatama Sabhibhaya Acharya Stakharishya Smada Viditam Visarsi Swami Bhagavati Jaya Anga Gori Vaishnava Jaya Ramacharya Sri Haridas Thakur Jaya Nain Sitahosi Krishna Chaitanya Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Jaya Sri Radha Krishna Bhogavna Sankam Radha Kundagiri Jaya Vrindavan Dham Ki Jaya Navadip Dham Ki Jaya Ganga Mai Ki Jai, Jamuna Mai Ki Jai, Guru Dwarka Dham Ki Jai, Swami Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai, all glories to the all glories to the Thank you very much.
I'm going to put on Om Shila Prabhupada because I haven't done it in a long time. And it's also very instead of the class today. This is the beginning of the construction of the first guest house at Mayapur. That was what you call the Lotus Building. It was designed in Calcutta by an architect named Mr. Gujarati who lived on the other side of the Pukur from Albert Road. He designed that nice building and showed it to Prabhupada, and he said, yes, this is a nice building. He said, build it. And this man, Mr. Gujarati, he had lines in his forehead. Prabhupada said, oh, he said, you have natural tilak. It's a very good sign. And we were still living up front in the straw house. We lived up in that straw house for a long time, even when the deities were in this temple on the ground floor. That would be summer because that's Kal Baishak season with those big cyclones. It would be so hot and then these huge black clouds would come up, and then it would just be this heavy downpour, and then you'd have some, freshness for a few days.
When Prabhupada came to Amsterdam, that was the time I met him the first time. And so Prabhupada just came out of immigration and he saw me and he waved. And it was very ecstatic. I fell to the ground, paid my obeisances, and I laughed and I cried and I had so many emotions at the same time, which was extraordinary. Normally you either laugh or you either cry, but you don't have these emotions at the same time. Then he came to the temple and he gave a lecture. And the amazing thing of the lecture was, prior to that I could not understand Prabhupada's broad Indian dialect at all, particularly since English is not my first language. But the amazing thing was that as soon as he started talking, I could understand every single word, which was quite remarkable. I couldn't believe it. I went later, put on a tape, and I listened to it, and there it was. I understood every single word. It was kind of a miracle.
It was 1971, and there was so many hippies at the time, and everything was a lot more liberal and free. This is Vondel Park. It's a very big park in Amsterdam. Hundreds of people turn up, actually. So Prabhupada did not give a class as such. He spoke very little, and he said that we should have kirtan and give them prasadam. That will be the best help that they can have at this point. Betanienstraat, which was the first place where we had a temple in Amsterdam, it was a garage in the street. Right behind was the red light district. And so Rabi transformed that garage into a temple room, and he actually built the altar. And the interesting thing about Amsterdam, because there were so many hippies, Mongol Arctic was always packed because they didn't sleep all night. They used to hear the kirtan reverberated around all the canals and the streets, and they all used to come and dance and sing with us. I mean, dozens of them every day, and after that they used to say for prasadam. So Amsterdam provided prasadam for literally thousands and thousands of people coming because they were so attracted. We were the only temple in Amsterdam in those days.
It was held in the late summer, of course, in August, and many non-devotees came, many young people, students. So just the scope of it, the dimension, and the number of devotees, number of non-devotees, it was sort of like a landmark event. Everyone that was there felt it to be so, and even Prabhupada, that something new and greater was occurring.
Srila Prabhupada was to come to New Vrindavan to conduct what he entitled the Bhagavad Dharma Discourses. He was going to speak from Srimad Bhagavatam for 7 days. The devotees at New Vrindavan, under the guidance of Kirtanananda Maharaj, were very, very enthusiastic to prepare the community for his arrival. They worked hard cutting down trees to construct a big pandal on the top of a mountain, the highest mountain of the area. That was to be the place where Srila Prabhupada would speak. Also, the devotees painted and renovated the house that Prabhupada was going to stay in, did so much landscaping, and especially they were working on building a brand new temple for Sri Sri Radha Vrindavan Chandra, which was to be inaugurated on the night of Janmashtami by Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada drove in a black Lincoln Continental into the New Vrindavan property. There was ecstatic kirtan as devotees welcomed him.
One thing that really made an impression on me at that festival was the loving concern by the sannyasis and senior disciples of Srila Prabhupada for all of us, preaching to us lovingly. We all sat together and ate prasadam. You could walk up to anyone and ask a question, and they would take the time to answer you and give you association. the feeling that we were a family, and there was Srila Prabhupada. He was our father. We all felt sheltered. We all felt protected. It was like a resurgence of energy and rededication. We all went back to our temples completely refreshed and rejuvenated and ready for whatever austerities we had to perform.
Devotees with very, very deep enthusiasm stood and sat all around him very closely as he spoke his welcoming address, thanking the devotees for their hard work, their efforts, and giving a basic message of Krishna consciousness. Srila Prabhupada, through his words and through his smile, while sitting there on that Vyasasan under a tree at Bahulavan, satisfied everyone's hearts. All of the hard work and intensive labor that was offered by the devotees over the previous several months was completely fulfilled. It all bore fruit when Srila Prabhupada smiled upon us and expressed his satisfaction to be with us at New Vrindavan again.
Cooking for the deities and doing the artiks. That was my service. So one time Srila Prabhupada was there when I did the artik. I had a wonderful realization. I turned around, I was dirty because I'd been cooking all day, and then they pushed me onto the altar. And I was totally embarrassed, but I turned around to offer incense to Srila Prabhupada, and I realized that he was always there on the Vyasa sign, that it was absolutely no different. And I still feel like that he's present, even though it would be nice to be able to see him more clearly. And so he was staying in the small house at Madhavan, and I was standing outside and he came out. And I suspect he came out to pass urine, which I realized years later, but I didn't know it at the time, and I was just standing there. And he came out, and I didn't pay obeisances. I couldn't say anything. I just stood there like a deer in the headlights of a car and was totally terrified. But it was a wonderful thing because he smiled. You know, he was so gracious. He smiled and made me feel so at ease and not like I had done something stupid or that I was, you know, somehow lacking. That he was so kind. He just stood there with me for a while, and then he smiled and turned around and went back in the building. I mean, he's always been kind to me like that because I'm very shy and, you know, I don't ever put myself forward. So he would put himself out for me. I had experiences like that with him where he would reassure me. That's what I felt like.
Devotees from New York and various other centers brought van loads of boga for the festival. And there was a kitchen set up right on the top of the mountain in the most primitive conditions with oil barrels. They made stoves, and many dozens and dozens of devotees volunteered cutting vegetables, cooking with smoke bellowing up into people's eyes. But it was such a beautiful sight to seeing devotees from all over America working together in these very primitive forests of New Vrindavan, preparing prasad for Srila Prabhupada's Vyas Puja feast.
And one time Prabhupada was sitting taking massage, and then right in front of Prabhupada, these two little kittens were wrestling. And they actually rolled right onto Prabhupada's lap. And so among the various zealous misconceptions that plagued us in our early days, one that we had is that, you know, animals were so contaminated that it's horrible to even touch them. I was sort of appalled that these two kittens, they were cute, but they just rolled right onto Prabhupada's lap. And I was thinking, oh my God, an animal touched Prabhupada. But to my surprise, Prabhupada just started petting them. And Prabhupada said two things. He said, look, even here there is love. And what I immediately understood from that was that our original love for Krishna is so strong that even in the body of an animal or a cat, it still manifests in some way. And then Prabhupada said, if I put my head in your lap and you cut my throat, that is the greatest sin. He said the greatest sin is that if someone trusts you and takes shelter of you, and then you betray them and cause them harm. It can be parents toward a child, it can be a man protecting a woman. Any situation where someone has sincerely trusted us and depends on us, and then we betray them.
This was such a unique altar arrangement here, because they had Radha Damodar in the center, Jagannath on the side, and Prabhupada on the left. You know, used to having the picture of Prabhupada on the left. We had Prabhupada in person on the left, next to the deities. I'd never seen that before, that you had an altar where Prabhupada was sitting next to the deities in person. So that was real special. And then I remember after the Vyasa Puja ceremony, it was time for the feast. They didn't close the curtains on the altar. I don't remember ever taking feast where they didn't close the curtains on the altar. So this whole sequence of events, and then just looking around at that whole hillside, it was a panoramic scene of, you know, buses and vans and tents and just devotees and cows all over the meadows. And it was just like a chapter of Krishna book come to life. Now, I think it was the same day, and I was down at the barn, and I was, you know, watching the Volkswagen go up the hillside, and the cows were all over that hillside, and they were decorated just like it's described in Krishna book with, you know, patterns made from different minerals, all different colors and different patterns. And when Prabhupada looked out of the Volkswagen, he smiled like, you know, I've never seen him smile except in that picture when in the Lilamrita, when Bridge stood up for the first time. He's just beaming, as Sally Agarwal described it, that oceanic smile. When Prabhupada looked out at the cows, decorated like that, and he smiled like that. That little episode, it's just like one, you know, remembrance of how sweet the whole occasion was.
And a devotee asked Prabhupada, what does it mean to have love for the spiritual master? What does love of the Guru mean? And so I was thinking Prabhupada would say, you have all these feelings in your heart, and you know, feel this and you feel that, and that's what I was expecting to hear. And Prabhupada said, love for the Guru means you have taken initiation. You have made vow to the spiritual master and taken fire sacrifice. You keep your vow. That is love. And when I heard that, I said, you know, again, that was one of those statements that Prabhupada would make where all the devotees, we were just taken completely by surprise, you know, at Prabhupada's definition of love. That it was not a feeling at all, but keeping our vow that we made to him when we got initiated. And that is how we show whether we really have love or not.
The next day was Vyasa Puja, and Srila Prabhupada, being very sensitive to the time, place, and circumstance, gave this wonderful Vyasa Puja address to describe the spiritual master and why the spiritual master is being offered so much honor and homage on this day, because after all, there were many people there, scholars and journalists, etc., who were not familiar with this etiquette. So Srila Prabhupada said, Krishna is very big. He's a very big person. And Prabhupada said, just like in this material world, if you want to please or even see a big man, it is very difficult to do. He often used Ford and Rockefeller. So he said, just like Mr. Ford, if you want to please Mr. Ford, it's very hard, or even to see him is very hard. But if you happen to see Mr. Ford walking his dog, and you give Mr. Ford's dog a 2-cent lozenge, Prabhupada used the word lozenge, then Mr. Ford is very easily pleased. So Prabhupada said, I'm the dog of God. It is very difficult to approach Krishna, but if you simply please his dog, Krishna will be pleased.
And the day of Prabhupada's arrival, they needed volunteers to fix up the house where Prabhupada was staying, and I went up to help. There was, of course, a frenzy of activity, just as there always is just before Prabhupada comes in any temple. And it was just an amazing sight to behold. And finally Prabhupada arrives, and all of the sannyasis come with him, and there's about 8 or 10 sannyasis, and they all file into the house. There's a few devotees hovering by the door, and Prabhupada sees us over there by the door, and everybody else is inside the house, the big guns in the movement, so to speak. And Prabhupada motions that we should also come inside. And so the devotees are outside the door. They're sitting just on the front row, right in front of Prabhupada. And Prabhupada's talking about developing New Vrindavan. One thing I remember he said is that New Vrindavan is non-different than Vrindavan in India. And that he also mentioned that Tulsi is the spiritual barometer for a temple. And then just out of nowhere, he looks right at me and he asks, "Are you trying to understand the philosophy?" So I was so dumbfounded that the Prabhupada was talking to me, I couldn't even say a word. I was just totally in a state of shock. But what I did appreciate is the way Prabhupada phrased that question, "Are you trying to understand the philosophy?" That if someone just makes an endeavor to understand, that's sufficient. Prabhupada would be pleased just by somebody making an endeavor to try to understand. Whether they understand or not, that's another matter, but just to try to understand the philosophy.
Bhardaraj was leading, and after the kirtan started getting a little more lively, Vishnu Jan Maharaj took over the lead. Vishnu Jan kept kind of lovingly singing the Maha Mantra. All the devotees were starting to rock side to side. And then Srila Prabhupada, he closed his eyes and he was starting to hit the kartals together with more and more force. At one point, which seemed to be the perfect crescendo of the chanting of Vishnu Jan, everyone was shocked when Srila Prabhupada interrupted Vishnu Jan and took over the kirtan. That had not been seen before. Prabhupada seemed to be in such an ecstatic mood that he had no choice but to take over the kirtan. And at that moment, everyone went absolutely mad. There was a rush toward the stage, and I was right in front of Prabhupada, and we were kind of crushed into the stage, and everyone's arms, it looked like 1,000 arms were outstretched to Srila Prabhupada. People started to cry. Srila Prabhupada's chanting was so beautiful. It's almost like the sky opened up, love of God came down, and it poured over all of us. Because at one point, they were crying so much that they just started to whimper and gasp. I've never been to a kirtan like that before in my life, never since. And I think I cried for about an hour after that.
The day wore on and we were fasting and chanting, and then nighttime fell, and the midnight arti. And after fasting and chanting, everybody's ready to break fast. But Srila Prabhupada has the devotees open up Krishna book, because now he wants to hear about Krishna. It's the appearance of Lord Krishna. So Prabhupada sits up straight and his eyes are open and he's all ready to hear, and we're all ready to eat, basically. So Krishna's pastimes are being read. Now it's 12:30, 1:45, 1 o'clock.
And everyone in the room, except for Prabhupada, is gradually being overcome by the forces of sleep. And we finished the first chapter, and then it continued into the second chapter and the prayers by the demigods for Lord Krishna in the womb, fairly weighty philosophical topics. And you would see these dandas nodding like divining rods, or like crossed swords crossing in the aisle, as the sannyasis bearing them would gradually be falling asleep, and then the rods would again split apart from one another as the sannyasis would jerk themselves awake, and then the rods would gradually descend again as the devotees holding them descended towards sleep.
But Prabhupada was very staunch. He was there listening very intently. And at one point, I remember looking around the room, and everyone in the room was asleep except for Prabhupada at one point. It was really incredible. I was watching Prabhupada very carefully to see if he was going to fall asleep. And at one point, Prabhupada looked like he was starting to nod. And he just leaned forward ever so slightly, and immediately caught himself and sat back up straight. And with his right hand, he made a chopping motion, like, no, I won't fall asleep. And from that moment on, he was sitting there listening in rapt attention.
Then suddenly, it's pitch black. The power had gone out. So I was thinking, what is Srila Prabhupada's expression going to be when the lights come back on? Is he going to be upset? What is he thinking about? It seemed like a very long time that the power was off. And when the lights came back on, Prabhupada had this huge ear-to-ear grin on his face. And the words that he said were, "So now, Krishna is sitting on the lap of Mother Yasoda. I think you are all tired, so we can stop here." And all the devotees started roaring.
I remember Gayatri and several other of ISKCON's best bakers spending several days to cook a gigantic cake for Srila Prabhupada's Vyas Puja. It was the most enormous cake I ever saw in my entire life. And they were cooking everything on this very, very simple makeshift wood oven. The fuel was wood, and they made the oven out of some sort of big cans, barrels. And they would just make a little piece at a time, a little piece at a time, and they just, as the days went on, they were stacking it up, and it ended up a huge, glorious, incredible cake. They brought it all the way up on the hill. Many devotees had to carry it, and then they offered to Srila Prabhupada. And as Srila Prabhupada was eating it, it became prasad. So within moments, devotees gathered around the cake for remnants, and they practically dove into that cake. Within a matter of seconds, this gigantic cake disappeared.
This was a really glorious return for him to Vrindavan. He just really enjoyed his disciples being there. And Prabhupada was really excited about going back there. I became his servant like a month before. And he had it planned out. And he would give little ideas of what his plan was. And that's what he said. He would be speaking in English, because it was for his disciples, he said. Not that he was going to speak in Hindi to the local inhabitants or Braj, but he wanted to speak to his disciples, and he was training them up in Krishna consciousness.
We lived in Keshi by the banks of the Jamuna, and every morning we would attend Mangal Arti in Keshi, and after that Achyutananda Swami would take a Sankirtan party and would go all the way to Ramanreti, where the Krishna Balaram temple was under construction. And then we'd walk back along the Parikrama path that followed the Jamuna River and go to the Radha Damodar temple in time to meet Srila Prabhupada there. And Prabhupada would lead us in the Jai Radha Madhava prayers. And then he would speak on Srimad Bhagavatam, first canto, chapter 2, Divinity and Divine Service. And although we had heard what he was saying before, it was the basic Krishna conscious philosophy. In that atmosphere, it had tremendous impact. I can't imagine how fortunate we were, that small group of us, to be in the most auspicious place, Vrindavan. And then within Vrindavan, in such an auspicious place where the Goswamis used to sit together, and to be there at such an auspicious time, Kartik, with Krishna's pure representative, Srila Prabhupada. It was simply Srila Prabhupada's kindness upon us that he made this arrangement to impress upon us this incredible philosophy of Krishna consciousness. So powerful, so important, so profound. So it was an incredible month, and a month that I will remember my entire life. Certainly, it moved me very deeply.
But once we were walking in Vrindavan along the road, and there was just a couple of us, and all of a sudden out of the blue, Prabhupada just stops, and he turned around, and he looked at me straight in the face, and he said, "So Dinanath, you will become a pure devotee?" Simultaneously, it was a question, but it was a directive too. He was inquiring, but at the same time, he was giving me a directive. And I immediately answered, I said, "Yes, Srila Prabhupada." Then, about a day later, we're walking again the same way. He stops again, turns and looks at me, and he says to me, "Don't change anything." Turns back around, and keeps walking.
Prabhupada's room at the Radha Damodar temple, you can see behind, there's like these little holes. It lets the wind come through. And you can actually see behind in the courtyard. So Shyamasundar's daughter, Saraswati, was there, and she was pulling on the shirt of a little Bengali gentleman. And she was telling the gentleman, "Who is Krishna? Do you know who is Krishna?" And the gentleman looked at this amused look on his face. Saraswati may have been 4 or 5 years old at the time. She was very young. And Prabhupada was looking, and we were looking. And the man was amused that this little girl would ask him that. And then she told him, "Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and you should surrender to him." And Prabhupada says, "Just see, she's a guru. She's preaching about Krishna."
We were all sick with fever and dysentery, and because the conditions were very austere. And I remember Vishaka and we used to prefer to just jump in the Jamuna River, even though it was completely pitch dark and we couldn't see anything, we couldn't touch the bottom, rather than go in the bathroom, which was slimy and indescribable. So then Prabhupada would give lectures in the morning on Bhagavatam, and in the evening on Nectar of Devotion. At that time, the courtyard was just dust, and there was a lot of, I remember, rubble around it. And to me, the temple looked like it was bombed out. We couldn't even tell it was a temple, the front of it. It was all like crumbling, and the inside there was rubble everywhere in the courtyard, and it was dust. But actually, I prefer the dust because it was the original dust where the 6 Goswamis sat. And Prabhupada did mention in his lecture how the 6 Goswamis used to sit in that very courtyard discussing Bhagavatam. And Jiva Goswami would be sitting and writing his commentaries, and another one would be singing the verses. So we were sitting in that same place hearing Prabhupada discuss Bhagavatam. And then after the evening nectar devotion, Prabhupada would have darshan in his room. And that time, he would just talk very informally. I remember him warning us not to associate with the Babajis. And he talked about Markat Vairagya, that the monkey has many wives. He's vegetarian, and he's renounced, but he has many wives. So the Babajis are like that. He told us, he said we shouldn't associate with them.
This pandal was organized for Srila Prabhupada
This place was exhibition grounds in the center of the Hyderabad city. And for about 10 days, Prabhupada gave lectures morning and evening. These deities are Radha Madhava, that must be in the morning, starting by Kirtan. So there were quite a good number of devotees, maybe at least 50. It was very successful. That was the most successful program of Srila Prabhupada in Hyderabad. Every day, about not less than 5,000, sometimes 10,000 used to come, especially in the evenings. And morning, 1,000 or 2,000. It was the beginning of our mission in Hyderabad. All the most important people attended as chief guests, and there was a committee also formed of some of the most important businessmen. So they were very impressed by this program. One gentleman, Mr. G. Pullareddy, was having a sweet shop in Hyderabad. He came forward to donate a piece of land measuring about 950 square yards in the center of the city. And now our ISKCON Hyderabad is situated there. At that time in Hyderabad, there had not been any rain for at least 1 year. In the last monsoon, there was no rain. But during our program there, in the last 2-3 days, the rain started. And Prabhupada mentioned this is due to our kirtan. It also came in newspapers that the Sankirtan is bringing rain.
So I was greeting the deities and offering to the deities, and Prabhupada came up and paid his obeisances to the deities and then walked back to give his morning class. Well, I'd always been trained that you never leave the deities alone. So even though I wanted to go listen to Prabhupada, I felt as a Pujari it was my duty to stay there. So I was staying there, and about 30 seconds later, Bhavananda comes running back down to where I was and said, "Oh, you are here? Good." Prabhupada wanted to make sure someone was with the deities. So that really struck me, that here, everybody's chanting, Jai Prabhupada, and he's going up, getting flower garlands, getting worshipped. But he's thinking, oh, is somebody with Radha and Krishna? And that was really nice. Both to see that Prabhupada had, was thinking like that, and then to feel that I had, understood Prabhupada in that way. So one morning, Prabhupada gave a lecture, and after the lecture, one Indian gentleman came up to Prabhupada. He had just purchased a small book. One of these small Krishna consciousness, topmost yoga system was out. And he asked Prabhupada to autograph it. So I was standing right next to Prabhupada, and Prabhupada smiled and said yes. So the gentleman handed him a pen, and Prabhupada autographed the book. So then another gentleman, seeing the opportunity, took a book and asked Prabhupada to autograph it, and Prabhupada autographed it. So I was standing right next to Prabhupada. So another man, the third man, he pulls out of his pocket a little notepad, and with a pen, and he asked Prabhupada for his autograph. Prabhupada looked at him and smiled and said, "No book, no autograph."
We were in Hyderabad. At this time, I was torn between, making my commitment to maintaining brahmachari and considering even going into sannyas and thinking about marriage. I knew in my heart that I wasn't, at the time wasn't right, and I was young, but my spirit wanted it, It wanted to live a renounced life, but my body and my mind wasn't ready, mature enough for it. So it was tearing my being in different directions. So I couldn't sleep one night. So I got up, and I walked down this building we were staying in, and I walked down the hallway, and I kind of peeked my head in Prabhupada's room. It was about 11 o'clock at night. And I peeked my head in, and I saw Prabhupada walking, pacing back and forth, up and down. So I kind of wormed in or something, slimed in, and offered my obeisances. And he was walking, and he looked over at me and waved to me, "Get up, come," So as he's walking, he brings me over to him, and we're walking side by side, back and forth, Hare Krishna, So he goes, "Yes." So I said, "Prabhupada, I'm thinking about going to Hrishikesh." He just became silent. He's listening. And he gave me a chance to explain. He didn't ask anything, I said, think about going to Rishikesh and maybe to live as a brahmachari, to go and live in an ashram. I have to be around any women and things, and I can dedicate myself to brahmachari life. So after explaining my heart and everything, he stopped, and it was like time stood still and the earth stopped, and everything. And he just looked at me dead in the face and the eyes, and he said, please don't do that. I wasted 12 years simply sitting in Vrindavan. He said, just tell everybody you meet about Krishna. At that point, I felt my problem was solved. I didn't know what I was going to do personally, but my problem was solved, and I bowed down, said, thank you, Prabhupada. He started walking again. I went and took rest.
Palika and Jamuna and Malati in the kitchen, they were preparing prasadam for Srila Prabhupada, and I was in the front room, and then Srila Prabhupada was in another interior room on the ground floor behind his desk, and his servant brought in a sadhu from South India, and he sat down in Srila Prabhupada's room, but I didn't hear any conversation going on between them. It was like, why aren't they speaking to each other? And then all of a sudden I heard a huge verbal argument, and they were screaming at each other at the top of their lungs in Hindi. And all of a sudden, I was really concerned, well, what's going on? And then all of a sudden this guy storms out of the house. And for the next 2 weeks, Srila Prabhupada was so grave. And the lectures, if you listen to those lectures, he's talking about Chatur Varnam Mayashristam Guna Karma Vibhagasha. Krishna has established a natural system of Varna and Ashram, Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Sudra. It is something that happens within society naturally, and people are judged to be in one of these categories, Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Sudra, by their qualities and by the work that they do. Never in this verse does Krishna mention anything about birth. So we found out later on that what this argument was about was this guy was coming in and saying, you can't do this. You can't take Malechas and Yavanas from the West, meat eaters, and convert them into Brahmins, give them the sacred thread, give them the sannyas tridandi. And of course, this argument had been presented in different ways to his acharya, his Guru Maharaj, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. So this was a fight that was going on for a long time, and Srila Prabhupada in the next 2 weeks quoted all the different verses from all the different shastras explaining that Krishna consciousness is a universal movement. It is not just for India. It includes the entire world.
They wanted devotees to come down from Calcutta and Mayapur for a pandal, because they had no devotees there. So I took Radha Madhava from here, and that other Lord Chaitanya, Tarankanti Ghosh, had made for us. And we went down and set up the pandal there. Prabhupada was looking at the deities, and he turned to me and he said, is that Radha Madhava? I said, oh yes, Prabhupada, we brought them from Mayapur. Anyway, he said, you should not take from Mayapur. He said, but what's done is done. When you take them back, they're to stay there forever.
This day, I was working in the kitchen under the supervisor of Panchati Vidya Swami, cleaning and all the details. And it's already after 9 in the morning and nobody came for prasad. So I asked Maharaj, why nobody's coming for prasad? He said, in the temple there's a fire sacrifice. And I said, what is fire sacrifice? He said, Prabhupada giving initiation. After that they will come. I said, what is initiation? So I was insisted to come and see what is a fire sacrifice and the initiation. I don't know anything about that. Maybe that was 3 or 4 weeks I was there. So he said, okay, you can go for 10 minutes, a lot of work to do in the kitchen. So I came and I stood in that side of the corner, watching what is going on. Then Prabhupada saw me. He said, you come and sit down for initiation. Then Prabhupada asked me many questions during that initiation. First he gave me the beads, then he said, what is your name? I said, my name is Sekhar Kumar, but Giriraj Swami and everybody call me Haridas. He said, okay, keep that name, but you must follow the teaching of Haridas. Then he asked me, do you follow 4 principles? Because I don't understand, I said no. Then Giriraj Swami said, Haridas, those not eating meat, not fish, not drinking. I said, yeah, those I know, those I follow. Then gave me the beads, and then he sent me back. He said, now you go to kitchen and start working. The fire sacrifice still not over. And when I gone back to kitchen to work, and Panchadevida Maharaj got angry at me. He said, what took long time, he was send you for 10 minutes. I said, I just got the initiation. He said, what you're doing, go back there. So I came back again, and that was like a climax of the fire sacrifice.
In 1972, in December, Srila Prabhupada went to the house of one Vaishnava gentleman named Kartikeya Mahadevya. And this particular gentleman had some very nice apartment, luxurious apartment, fronting the ocean. So Srila Prabhupada went to his place and stayed there. It's pretty spacious quarters. Quite a few devotees every night would come there. So we went to see Srila Prabhupada. We had come back from a trip to South India. We had gone to Madurai, Coimbatore, Bangalore, several places. And Prabhupada says, someday I want to go there and see. So Prabhupada said, would you please make arrangements to take me there someday? I said, okay, Prabhupada. And then we told Prabhupada, well, Prabhupada, we've been to some place in Coimbatore, and we worked really hard, and we were going to so many places, and we were trying to make life members, but we could hardly make any life members. And we went to some other place, and we hardly did anything. We just sat in the room and chanted. We ended up making like 20 life members. So we don't understand this. And Prabhupada said, well, you don't understand because you're too attached to the result. And then Prabhupada quoted that verse from Bhagavad Gita, Karmani vadikaraste mahphalesu kadachana. That, you do your duty, but don't be attached to the result. And Prabhupada says, you leave the result to Krishna. And Prabhupada said, you leave the result to Krishna, act sincerely. And Prabhupada says, if you're very sincere, Krishna himself personally will see that you become successful. And Prabhupada says, but you have to understand, this is not simply but an amount of money. He says, you do the service, and Krishna will judge. Krishna will decide. And then Prabhupada says, my Guru Maharaj one time told me that even if there's not so many people, we can preach to the wall. That doesn't matter. We can preach to the wall. Prabhupada says, you just go on preaching, that's all. You just be sincere, preach, and Krishna will make it successful.
The last day of the Pandal was a Sunday, and more people attended than ever before. There's tens of thousands of people in the huge Pandal. Prabhupada lectured very strongly from the Vyasasana, and then when he finished, the kirtan began, as it did every evening. This kirtan was especially enthusiastic. And then at one point, he got up off the Vyasasana and went before the deities, clapping. And then he started to circumambulate the deities with a very light step. He went around once, and then he went around a second time, and then a third time. And when he came before the deities, very gracefully, he put his arms in the air and he began to dance. It was almost as if he was weightless. He danced so effortlessly. And everyone was electrified by this. Everyone in the audience was riveted on Srila Prabhupada dancing before the deities. At that point, I was in the audience. I was photographing the Pandal program. And it felt as if all the sinful reactions of all those people suddenly lifted. It was an extraordinary feeling. There was such a lightness there. It's stated in the Nectar Devotion that if you clap your hands in kirtan, then the sinful reactions leave you, just like birds leaving a tree when there's a sudden noise. They all fly off together. And that's what it felt like. There's this burden of karma lifting all at one time.
In spite of all the stories of Prabhupada, I, who had been an English major in college and read a lot of fiction, had always had an idea of there being a dichotomy between the author and his works. So I just always had this keenness to meet Prabhupada, the author of this book, the Bhagavad Gita, and other ones that were coming out. And when Prabhupada came to Australia, what struck me was that whether Prabhupada was speaking before an audience of 600-700 people, or whether he was just in a room alone with me, he was basically speaking the Bhagavatam and the Gita. He was the Gita and the Bhagavatam. You know, you might think that someone would have a public persona, but then when they get back home, you know, there might be other topics of conversation. But he would preach just as strongly to me as the only other person in the room as he would in a huge rented hall with a large crowd. That inspired me to launch a very, very deep study of Srila Prabhupada's books. And I think because I did that and continue to do it to this day, I've never faltered in my faith in Krishna consciousness.
We are selling about 25 to 30,000 rupees worth books daily.